The kettle was still warm when my grandson's wife told me to leave the kitchen. I'd just finished pouring my afternoon tea, the same red rose I've been drinking since I was a young bride in Sudbury, and I was reaching for the tin of digestives I keep on the second shelf when she walked in carrying a stack of her yoga magazines and set them down right where my cup was, not beside it, on top of the saucer, as if my saucer was a coaster she'd been looking for. "Nan," she said, and I always hated when she called me that, because I'd asked her 3 times to call me Grandma like the rest of the family. "We're going to need the kitchen this evening, the whole evening. Some friends are coming over for a dinner party, and I've planned the menu around the island, so, that's how she ended sentences, with that one little word that meant everything she didn't want to say out loud. So, get out. So, you're in the way. So, you're old and inconvenient and you should know better." I lifted the magazines off my saucer. I picked up my tea. I didn't say anything because I'd promised myself after the second Christmas they spent in my house that I wouldn't be the kind of woman who fights in her own kitchen. My mother used to say that a woman who has to raise her voice in her own home has already lost it. She was right. My mother was right about most things, and I wish I'd listened to her sooner. I took my tea to the den, the small one off the hallway with the green wallpaper my late husband Eldon picked out in 1987, and I sat in his old recliner and I waited. I waited for the prickling in my eyes to stop. I waited for the part of me that wanted to march back in there and remind her whose name was on the deed. I waited until I could hear myself think over the roaring in my ears. This was Belleville, Ontario, the town I'd lived in for 41 years. The bungalow was Eldon's and mine. We'd paid it off 2 years before he died of his second heart attack, and I'd put new windows in myself the spring after the funeral because I needed something to do with my hands. The basement still smelled like his pipe tobacco, even though no one had smoked down there in over a decade. It was my house. It had always been my house. But somewhere along the way, in the 4 years since my grandson Tobin and his wife Marielle had moved in with their 2 little ones, it had stopped feeling like mine. It started so small. That's the thing nobody tells you about losing your home from the inside. There's no one moment. It's 1,000 moments, and each one is too tiny to fight about, so you swallow it, and the swallowing is what kills you. It started with the thermostat. Marielle was always cold, even in July, and she'd nudge it up to 24 when I wasn't looking. I'd quietly nudge it back down to 21. Then she started locking it with one of those plastic covers you can buy at Canadian Tire. I never said a word. I just put on a cardigan. Then it was my grocery shelf in the pantry. I had my own things, my no-name peanut butter and my tin of Maxwell House and the box of Shreddies I ate every morning, and one day I went looking for the Shreddies and found a stack of her protein powder where they used to be. My cereal was on the floor next to the recycling. Not in the recycling, beside it, like she'd considered tossing it and changed her mind. Then it was the spare room I'd kept as a sewing room for 30 years. Tobin came to me one Sunday and said the kids needed more space to play and could they convert it. He said it like a question, but it wasn't one. The Singer machine Eldon bought me for our 10th anniversary went into the basement, into a corner that gets damp every spring, and I didn't sew for nearly a year because I couldn't bear to go down and see it sitting there like a relative no one visited. I told myself I was being a good grandmother. I told myself this was what families did for each other. Tobin had lost his job at the GM plant in Oshawa, and they'd had to leave their townhouse, and Marielle was pregnant with their second when they came to me with that look on his face, the one his father used to have when he was about to ask for something he was ashamed of needing. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. He was my daughter Maxine's only boy, and Maxine had been gone 4 years by then, taken by the same cancer that took her father, and Tobin was the closest thing I had left to her on this earth. So I said yes, and I meant it, and I would say yes again if I had to choose. I want you to know that. I would say yes 100 times for that boy. The problem was never the yes. The problem was that nobody ever said thank you, and after a while, the silence where the thank you should have been started to weigh more than the favor. 4 years went by. Tobin found work, eventually, at a logistics company near Trenton. Good work, decent pay, full benefits. He didn't lose his job again, he just never left. Marielle started a yoga studio downtown, the kind with mason jars full of cucumber water in the lobby, and she put my pull-out couch on Marketplace without asking me because she said the basement needed to be staged for her photographer. I came home from the hairdresser's that day and my couch was gone. The couch I'd nursed Maxine on. Just gone. I asked her where it was, and she said she'd sold it for $40, and the money was in an envelope on the counter. She said it like she'd done me a favor, like cleaning out clutter. I put the $40 in my purse, and I didn't say a word. I should have said something then. I know that. Every comment under every story like mine says the same thing. You should have set boundaries. You taught them how to treat you. And every single one of those comments is right, and every single one of them has never been a 72-year-old widow looking at her grandson, the only grandchild she has left, and trying to decide whether the truth is worth losing him over. So I didn't say anything. I just started making my plans quietly. That's what women of my generation do. We don't slam doors. We unlock them slowly, one at a time, and we walk out when no one is looking. The dinner party night, I sat in the den with my tea and I listened to her laughing in my kitchen. I heard wine being poured into glasses I'd registered for 43 years ago at the Bay. I heard a man say, "Marielle, this place is gorgeous. Did you do all this yourself?" And I heard her laugh and say, "It's been a labor of love. A labor of love." That's when I got up. I walked into the kitchen with my empty teacup, and the 4 guests at the island all turned and looked at me the way people look at a stranger who's walked into the wrong room at a hotel. Marielle's smile froze on her face. "This is, she said, "this is Tobin's grandmother. She lives here too." Tobin was standing by the fridge with a glass of red wine. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. "I just came in to wash my cup," I said, and I walked to the sink, and I rinsed it, and I set it in the drying rack, and I went back to the den. I sat in Eldon's recliner in the dark for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, and I called my friend Hettie from church. Hettie's husband, Roman, was a real estate lawyer for 36 years before he retired, and Hettie had been telling me for over a year that I needed to come talk to him. "Just for a coffee, dear," she'd say, "just to know your options." I'd kept saying I would. I'd kept not doing it. That night I told her I was ready. She said Roman would meet me at their kitchen table at 9 the next morning and she'd have the percolator on. I packed an overnight bag while the dinner party was still going. I took my prescriptions from the medicine cabinet and the photo of Eldon from my dresser and the small wooden box where I keep my mother's wedding ring and the deed to the house. I'd kept the deed in my own name. I want you to understand that. When Eldon died, the house passed to me alone, and I never put anyone else on it. Not Tobin, not Marielle, not even Maxine when she was still alive. The house was mine on paper, and it was mine in the eyes of the law, no matter how much it had stopped feeling that way. I walked out the front door at 10:15 that night with my overnight bag and my purse and my keys, and I closed the door behind me without slamming it. Marielle saw me leave. I caught her eye through the front window. She raised her wine glass at me, just slightly, like a salute, and then she turned back to her guests. She thought I was going to a hotel for the night. I drove to the Comfort Inn on North Front Street, and I checked in for 3 nights. $89 a night, plus tax. I paid with my own credit card, the one Tobin doesn't know exists, the one I've been keeping for emergencies since Eldon died. I asked for a room on the ground floor because my knees aren't what they used to be, and the young woman at the desk gave me one with a window that looked out at a Tim Hortons parking lot. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat up in bed with the TV on low and a cup of bad coffee from the in-room maker, and I made a list on the hotel notepad of every single thing I was going to do. The next morning, I drove to Hettie's. Roman was at the kitchen table in his cardigan, with a yellow legal pad and a pot of coffee and a plate of bran muffins his wife had made. He listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I was done, he asked me 3 questions. "The deed is in your name only?" "Yes." "Is there any written agreement signed by you giving them tenancy or any property interest?" "No. They just moved in. We never signed anything." "Have they been paying you rent? Anything documented?" "No. Nothing." He nodded and he wrote something on his pad and he said, "Then they are not tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. They are licensees. That is a much better situation for you than you might think." He explained it to me the way Eldon used to explain car repairs, in plain words, without making me feel small. Because there was no rental agreement and no rent had ever changed hands, my grandson and his wife had no protection under Ontario's tenant laws. They had what was called a bare license to be in my home, and a bare license could be revoked by the homeowner with reasonable notice. Reasonable notice, in his professional opinion, was 30 days. He could draft a notice to vacate that afternoon and have it served by a process server tomorrow morning. He could also draft a cease and desist for any further tampering with my property, including the unauthorized sale of my furniture. "Marielle sold my couch," I said. The words came out smaller than I meant them to. Roman set his pen down. "Edie," he said, using the nickname only old friends still use, "I want you to listen to me. What you have allowed in that house is your business, and I won't lecture you. But what they have done, in law, is conversion. That is the unauthorized taking of another person's property. We don't need to pursue it, but I want you to know we could. You are not the one in trouble here. They are." I started crying then, not loudly. Just the quiet kind that you don't really notice until your tea goes blurry. Hettie put her hand on mine and didn't say anything, and Roman pretended to write something on his pad to give me a minute. That afternoon I signed the notice to vacate. 30 days from the date of service. I also signed a power of attorney for Roman to act on my behalf for any related matters, and an authorization for him to coordinate with a locksmith and a security company once the 30 days were up. I went back to the Comfort Inn and I called my niece Constance, who lives in Kingston, and I told her everything. Constance is my younger sister Doreen's girl, a high school principal, 61 and sharp as a tack. She drove up that same evening and met me at the hotel, and we ate club sandwiches at the Boston Pizza next door, and we talked for 4 hours. "Auntie," she said, "you are not the bad guy here. I want you to write that down on the hotel paper and put it in your purse and look at it every time you start to feel guilty." I did write it down. I still have that piece of paper in my wallet. The notice was served the next morning, a Friday, by a process server Roman had used for years. He rang the doorbell at 9:45, and Tobin opened the door, and the man handed him the envelope and said, "Service complete," and walked back to his car. Marielle was watching from the window. The process server had been instructed to film the service on his phone for our records. Roman had thought of everything. My phone started ringing at 10 o'clock on the dot. The first call was from Tobin. I let it go to voicemail. I was sitting in the breakfast area of the Comfort Inn with a plate of microwave eggs and a bagel, and I watched his name flash on the screen, and I let it ring. The second call was from Marielle. I let that go too. The third call was from Tobin again, and this time he left a message. I sat in my room and I listened to it on speaker. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was the voice he used to have when he was 9 and he'd broken the lamp in the front room. "Grandma, what is going on?" There's a man here," he gave me. "What is this? Is this a joke? Please call me back, please." I waited until I'd finished my coffee and brushed my teeth and put on my coral lipstick. Then I called him back. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Grandma, what is happening? This paper says we have to leave in 30 days. What? What are you doing? Where are you?" "Tobin," I said. "I want you to put me on speaker so Marielle can hear too, please." He did. I heard her breathing in the background. "What you read," I said, "is a legal notice to vacate. You and your wife have 30 days to remove yourselves and your belongings from my house. Roman Halsey is my lawyer. Any further communication about this matter goes through him. His information is on the back of the notice." "Grandma, this is insane. This is our home." "It is not your home. I am sorry. It has never been your home. It has been my home, and you have been my guest, and I have loved having you here, and I would have loved it for the rest of my life if you and your wife had treated it like the gift it was." There was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard Morella's voice, loud, sharp. "You're throwing out your own family? Your own great-grandchildren? Over what? A couch. You're going to put 2 little kids out on the street because of a couch?" I closed my eyes. "Marielle," I said, "I am not putting anyone on the street. I have given you 30 days, which is more notice than any court would require. I have spoken with my lawyer. He is happy to provide you with a list of family shelters and rental assistance programs in the Quint region if you need them. I will also pay the first and last on a rental for you, up to a reasonable amount, as a one-time gift to my grandson because I love him. That is more than fair. That is more than you have given me in 4 years." She started to say something, but Tobin cut her off. "Grandma, please, can we just talk about this in person? Please, please come home. This is your house. You can come home anytime. We can figure this out." "Tobin, sweetheart, I am home. I'm in a hotel and I am safer here than I have been in my own kitchen for 2 years. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm 72 years old and I do not have time left to live like a guest in the house your grandfather built me. Goodbye, sweetheart. Roman will be in touch." I hung up. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time after that. My hands were shaking. I had to put them between my knees to make them stop. But I'll tell you something. Underneath the shaking, there was a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Like the part of me that had been holding her breath since 1987 had finally let it out. The 30 days were not easy. I won't pretend they were. Marielle called Roman's office screaming. She left messages for me at the front desk of the Comfort Inn until Roman sent the manager a letter, and the calls stopped. She posted things on Facebook about elder abuse and family abandonment until her own sister, who I'd always liked, called her privately and told her to shut up. Tobin came to the hotel twice, and I let him in both times, and we sat and talked, and he cried. Real tears, and I cried with him, and I held his hand the way I used to when he was small, and at the end of both visits, I told him I loved him, and I was not changing my mind. The 3rd week, he found a townhouse to rent on the west side of town. 3 bedrooms, decent yard, near a French immersion school for the kids. He sent me the listing and asked what I thought, and I told him it looked perfect. And I sent him a check for $4,000 the next day for first and last and the moving truck. I'd promised. I keep my promises. On day 31, Roman's locksmith met me at my house at 9 in the morning and changed every lock on every door, plus the garage. The security company installed 2 cameras, one on the front porch and one on the back deck, and a new alarm system that sent alerts to my phone. By 11 o'clock, the house was mine again in every sense of the word. It took me 3 days to walk through every room and remember what was mine. The Singer machine came up from the basement that first weekend. My niece Constance drove up from Kingston and helped me carry it. We set it back up in the spare room, the one Marielle had turned into a playroom, and I scrubbed the crayon off the walls, and I ordered a fresh coat of paint in the soft yellow I'd always wanted, but Eldon had said reminded him of mustard. He'd been gone 14 years. The walls could be yellow now. I bought a new pull-out couch on sale at the Brick. It wasn't the one Maxine had nursed Tobin on. Nothing would ever be that one. But it was mine, and I'd picked it out myself, and the deliveryman carried it through my front door past the new locks and the new cameras, and they set it down in my den, and I gave them each a 20 and a Tim Hortons gift card, and they left. That night, I made myself a cup of red rose. I sat on the new couch. I watched the news at the volume I liked, which is exactly 2 clicks louder than the average person needs because my left ear isn't what it was. There was no one to roll their eyes. There was no one to nudge the thermostat up while I wasn't looking. There was no one selling my furniture on Marketplace for $40. I want to tell you about Tobin, because I know you're wondering. He calls me every Sunday at 4. We talk for half an hour, sometimes longer. He brings the kids over for lunch on the second Saturday of every month, just the kids and him, and we make grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I let them watch their shows on the iPad while I talk to my grandson at the kitchen table like an adult. He apologized eventually, properly, not with the panicked "I'm sorry" of the hotel visits, but later, after he'd had time to think, and I accepted it because forgiving him was the last gift I had left to give my daughter. Marielle does not come to the lunches. Marielle and I have not spoken since the day she screamed at me on speakerphone. I understand from Tobin that she is in counseling and that she is working on things. I wish her well. I do not need to see her. I am 73 now. I joined a quilting circle at the church, the one Hettie has been trying to drag me to for 6 years. I take a Tai Chi class at the senior center on Tuesdays. I've been to Newfoundland for the first time in my life, on a bus tour with Constance, and I cried at Cape Spear because the ocean looked exactly like the ocean my mother used to talk about from her childhood in Cape Breton. If you are watching this, and you are sitting in your own house feeling small in it, I want you to hear me. You are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not a bad mother or a bad grandmother for wanting your home to feel like your home. The people who love you will understand. The people who don't, well, they were going to be upset whether you spoke up at year 1 or year 10. I waited too long. I would tell you not to wait as long as I did, but I will also tell you this: it is never, ever, ever too late. I was 72 when I walked out of my own front door with an overnight bag, and I was 72 and 3 months when I walked back in through the new locks. And I'm telling you, both of those women were me, and the second one is the one who's still here. You are allowed to choose your own quiet. You are allowed to come home. I think about that night at the Comfort Inn more often than I expected to. Not because I miss it, but because the woman who sat on the edge of that bed with her hand shaking between her knees was the same woman who'd been quietly disappearing for 4 years, and I needed to understand how she got there before I could understand how she got out. The truth is, none of what happened in my kitchen happened by accident. Every time Marielle nudged the thermostat up and I put on a cardigan instead of speaking, I was teaching her. Every time I walked past my Singer machine sitting in that damp basement corner and didn't ask for my sewing room back, I was teaching her. Every time I said yes when my body was saying no, I was writing the rules she was going to live by inside my own house. I want you to understand that I am not blaming myself for what they did. They are grown adults, and they made grown choices. But I was the one who decided, again and again, that keeping the peace was worth more than keeping my dignity, and that decision had a cost, and the cost came due in my own living room. What saved me, in the end, wasn't anger. Anger I had plenty of, and anger never built anything in my life. What saved me was thinking. Sitting in Eldon's recliner that night and refusing to react until I could see the whole thing clearly. Calling Hettie instead of calling Tobin. Listening to Roman explain the difference between a tenant and a licensee, and writing it down on hotel paper so I wouldn't forget. The mind, when you give it room, is a stronger ally than the mouth ever was. My mother used to say a quiet woman with a plan is more dangerous than a loud woman with a temper, and I didn't really understand her until I was 72. And nerve. I won't pretend nerve was easy. Walking out my own front door with that overnight bag was the hardest thing I've done since I buried my husband. There was a part of me that wanted to go back inside and apologize to Marielle, just to make the feeling stop. Sitting through Tobin crying at the hotel and not changing my mind, that took something out of me. I'm still rebuilding. But nerve isn't the absence of fear. Nerve is doing the right thing while your hands are shaking, and then putting your hands between your knees and doing it again the next day. If you take anything from my story, take this. Be kind, but do not confuse kindness with silence. Be patient, but do not let patience become permission. And when the moment comes, and you'll know the moment when it comes, choose the woman you want to be for the rest of your life over the woman who keeps the peace at her own expense. Your peace counts too. It always did. I just took a long time to remember.